have always wanted to stop at this beautiful section of highway. Let me see if I can give you some understanding here and take a video. And I'm stopped in terrible traffic. It's been stop and stop and stop and go and then stop. So I'm going to take this opportunity to give some thoughts I've just been having about the King James Bible and the King James only controversy. These come from my work on the King James Bible Research Council. I put real hours into this. And there are two things that I'm noticing that I'm seeing with some clarity that I don't think I've had before and that I want to share with you and with them, if these brothers will listen. First, I mentioned this in the video that I did, the 2-hour video, but as long as the debate is set up between two and only two options, namely you can understand the King James or you can't, well then, of course, I'm going to land in the you can understand it, because it's not entirely unintelligible, it's mostly intelligible. I've been consistent about this. If my side, lets the debate be framed that way, well, we're going to lose. Again, I would want to lose if those were the only two options, but they're not. Our King James only brothers don't acknowledge the possibility of gradations in between totally intelligible and totally unintelligible, 100%, intelligible and 0% intelligible. But what if there are gradations and a text can be 99% intelligible because just a couple archaisms have developed over time? Or the way I'd put it, I don't know, my gut says 95% intelligible, 90% intelligible. That's where I'd put the King James Version. That's my first little insight from the King James Bible Research Council event that I gave some coverage to. The second one has to do with Dan Hafley's talk on the readability of the King James. And traffic may be moving, and so you might be seeing this in a second segment. But let me keep talking as long as I can. Dan said that he's 100% King James, and I countered that, no, I think he's 98% King James, because he was willing to acknowledge readability difficulties, and that is not common in that world. But here's what I'd say. At a portion of the video, he said, is the risk of, the Bible being changed worth the effort of updating it? He said, we'd have to be involved. Okay, here goes traffic. I'm going to start up again. Okay, I'm back. I think they're cutting tree limbs or something, and I don't know if they've mismanaged this, but I've never been in a backup on I-5 going from Mount Vernon to Bellingham quite like this one. Okay, Dan Hafley says, and I understand why, he doesn't trust modern versions. I think he should, but empirically speaking, many people in the King James only world, well, effectively all people in the King James only world don't trust the people behind modern translations. Even those who use those translations use them as commentaries and not as the Bible. But here's, let me finally get to my point after all this traffic is addling my brain. Unless people like Dan are willing to stand up within King James onlyism and acknowledge that, yeah, we're at 95% intelligible, or 90 or 85, or, give me a number, the will never be found for the King James to be updated. It cannot be found, because this is the only reason for it to be updated. As long as they frame the debate as either you can understand the King James or you can't understand the King James, then they themselves will never be able to involve themselves in a revision. Because as soon as pastors, who are the leaders, of course, and who typically are the most biblically knowledgeable, that's not always the case, but certainly that's supposed to be the way it is. As soon as they start to intimate that maybe they'd be willing to be involved in a King James update. I've seen this actually recently with a friend of mine who kind of functions as an assistant pastor at a King James only church. People get very suspicious. They're going to make their sheep skittish if they get involved in a King James update. So I don't think I will ever film on a highway again unless I'm in traffic like this. This is still a little bit brain-addling, but so beautiful around here. Wish I could more adequately show you. But I encourage my brothers in the King James Bible Research Council to continue down the path that Dan has named, and you're the ones who have got to come to the realization of the King James's readability difficulties, which are not its own fault and not our fault, just the fault of language change. Another quick thought, my best opponent, Christopher Yetzer, he's really done some excellent work recently, uncovering dozens, he posted this on Facebook, dozens of attempts to update the King James over the last several hundred years. Why haven't any of them really succeeded? You know, I would say the New King James is one of them, but it did go a little further than just updating the English. I acknowledge that. Why didn't it succeed? Why haven't these dozens of other attempts, like the Webster Bible, succeeded? I think that it can only be because at the center of people who, you know, the crowd that prefers and loves the King James, there is no recognition of the depth of the readability problems. They do not realize how much they're misunderstanding, and I think they have typically framed it in, you can understand the King James or you can't. Those are my quick thoughts as I wait here in traffic on I-5. Hope that helps you. Okay, I'm still in a horrendous traffic jam, so you're going to get some more linguistic thoughts. I was listening to a book about the rise and fall of the Comanche Nation in 1750 to 1850, but I want to do this instead. Actually, just the other day, I was driving my daughter home from flute lessons, and she must have seen a sign for salmon, and she said, "Dad, why is there an L in salmon?" And you know, I just happened to know the answer. I hadn't looked up that particular word, not that I know of, and certainly not anytime recently, but I know the way English works. I know where English words come from. I know spelling. And often I know, because of etymologies, I know why a given word is spelled the way it is. And it's because, I said to her, some officious, I used that word and then I explained it to her, I think I did, some officious person at some point in the past saw that the equivalent Latin word had an L in it, and even though our English word doesn't pronounce that L, this person thought, well, it must properly be spelled with an L. That's actually the same reason that island has an S, even though we don't pronounce that letter. We don't say Island or Iceland or something. And actually, as it happens, isle is a Germanic word and shouldn't have an S at all. That's for sure. And even by the laws of etymology, it's just kind of silly to insist that because a word was pronounced a certain way many centuries ago, we should include that letter. Well, because of this kind of thing, English has all kinds of odd spellings. You know, there's that famous little exercise that actually was in the Scholastic Bowl championship that I was involved in way back when, one of my prouder moments. The person who was reading the questions read out these words: rough, tough, through, I'm not going to remember them all now, but cough, and they all had O-U-G-H in them. You're supposed to perceive that that was the similarity. Well, slough or slew, you know, depending on how you pronounce that, English spelling has given us these crazy circumstances in which O-U-G-H can mean many, many different sounds. And if you were to try spelling reform, just imagine the hue and cry. You know, I myself, a reformer of sorts when it comes to English Bible translation, I don't have the will to try to update spelling. I don't want it to be updated because then I'd have to relearn a bunch of spellings, and I have my entire life of 42 years. Well, ever since I started to read, I've been a good speller and kind of prided myself on that. Not just kind of, really did pride myself on that. The only thing that trips me up is homonyms. When I'm writing fast and I'm thinking about multiple things, I can write there, T-H-E-R-E instead of T-H-E-I-R. That does happen. Or here, H-E-R-E versus H-E-A-R. But give me enough time and I'll be totally fine. I won't have any problem spelling those words. Okay, is the traffic moving a little bit? We shall see. I better not do this if it's actually moving. Okay, gonna put this down. Okay, we're back, folks. I'm stopped yet again. This is I think, probably the longest traffic jam I've ever been involved in. Thankfully, this is an absolutely beautiful spot, and hopefully I'll show you some more footage of that. Why do I bring all this up about spelling reform? Well, there's a parallel here to be made. I think this is true of all languages that have spelling, but, my knowledge really is limited to the Indo-European languages that I've studied. And even those, of course, English I know far, far better than any other. But pronunciation is always moving out of phase, occasionally back into phase, I would think, in some isolated places, but usually moving out of phase with spelling. Because what is spelling? Once it becomes standardized, spelling is a snapshot of how people pronounce words at a particular time. Jared Longsign in the King James Bible Research Council video repeatedly pronounced the word that I would pronounce as until. He pronounced it as untel, like there's an E in it. And up here in Washington, I hear people say the word bag, and I hear them pronounce it as beg. And one time my wife and I asked one of our good friends who can take this sort of thing, why do you say beg? And she didn't even know that she said beg. To her, beg and bag weren't different. I think they call that a morphemic difference in pronunciation, in phonemes. That's the technical language. We've got policeman that just drove by. That is odd. There must be something going on worse than I thought. Anyway, it looks like this traffic jam is probably going to last a little longer. So when you manage to standardize spelling, and if you look back at the history of spelling in English, it's pretty crazy. When you standardize spelling, you're taking a snapshot of where the language is. That means that the language is going to move on and change. And at some point, the spelling is going to be possibly so distant from the pronunciation that reform is going to be required. I think some reforms have already occurred in minor places and at times, but this is very, very difficult. Somebody's going to have to go to the trouble at some point. I think that's many centuries from now in English, as long as it continues on its current path. Oh, I got to look forward. Okay, here comes, no, I see the policeman. What is going on? I'm going to find out. I will see if I can get video of it for you. I get similar kind of resistance. The resistance that I feel towards spelling reform is the resistance I think a lot of people feel toward updating or replacing the King James in pulpits. I'm not telling anybody, take it out of your study, any more than I would stop spelling my preferred way when I'm writing myself notes. Let's say there were spelling reform. I think my own notes to myself probably wouldn't be reformed. It's too late for me. I'm 42. I am a professional writer and editor. I'm used to the way things are. I will just, if spelling reform came tomorrow, I would just have to die, not really truly being reformed, okay? So, traffic is speeding up again. Let me, for safety reasons, put this down. So what would be the hue and cry if people tried to reform spelling? Because you'd get spellings like THRU for through and NITE for night, which are perfectly reasonable, in fact so reasonable that they are used on signage all over the place. It's kind of considered cutesy, but you could readily imagine, if you're a linguistic-y kind of person, that that is the kind of reform that would happen. I think plenty of people would be saying exactly what they say to me when I call for an update or revision of the King James, or a replacement of it with a contemporary translation. They say, you're dumbing down the language. And I get that when it comes to spelling. Like, I would feel the same way just looking at these things. But what is it? What is essential? I mean, is NIGHT really smart and NITE really dumb? No, that's a convention. There's nothing intrinsic about NITE as a spelling that makes it dumb. There's nothing intrinsic about our English that makes it dumb. Why is my effort to update or replace the King James in pulpits, why is it worth it despite this hue and cry? Because we're talking about the Bible. We're talking about God's Word. When it comes to human spelling of the word night or the word through, it's just not as big a deal as people understanding what God says. I think it's worth enduring the hue and cry and patiently making the case over and over again, as I've done so often, that dead words and false friends make the King James not entirely unintelligible, but sufficiently unintelligible. 95% intelligible, 5% unintelligible. I don't know exactly where I put that figure. I'm kind of working on that. That it's time for change. Okay, those are my rambling thoughts. Hopefully now I can get on to work.